Hey everyone, welcome back to Bigfoot's Wilderness. Before I start my story, I just wanted to take a few moments to say thank you. I really do appreciate all of the views, and I hope you find the stories interesting. Um, those of you that have subscribed, thank you so much. Hopefully, there will be many more that do subscribe as well. I myself have a pretty large playlist of people that I listen to, so just go ahead and throw me in there in your playlist. Add me up. I've got somewhere around 75 to 80 different people that I listen to, and I really do enjoy the variety on YouTube. So I hope you do too, and I hope you continue to listen. And let's go ahead and get into our story. The story is called Barrett Mountain Bigfoot. This took place in the mountains of North Carolina in Alexander County on top of Barrett Mountain in 1982. My parents had divorced when I was 10 in 1980. We had always lived in town with sidewalks, stores, parks, and friends. In 1981, my mother met a man we will call John from Alexander County, and we started spending some time there. He owned a piece of land on Barrett's Mountain, the kind of land where they had to clear the trees and underbrush to be able to build a small log cabin for us to use on weekends. There were some homes on the mountain, but as you went higher and closer to the top of the mountain, which is where he built his cabin, there was just a handful of other homes, and those were mostly used as weekend getaways or hunting cabins. My mom, sister, and I would come up on weekends. On those weekends, we'd have cookouts with my mom's new beau and his friends. They'd bring their kids and we would venture out, but not too far from the cabin, as I was not really an outdoors girl and still am not today. But we climbed trees, waded in the creek, ate apples from the orchard further up the mountain past our cabin. We threw rocks and built forts, things I myself as a city girl had never done, but I enjoyed it. I was a kid, of course I did. John, my mom's boyfriend, had installed lights on poles on the front and back of the cabin so they could entertain as the evening went on. One particular night, the music was playing and the grill was going, and us kids were running around playing tag at the near end of the drive. John had a pit bull named Rocky that came flying by us kids whimpering like he was hurt. He ran straight to the front of the cabin where the adults were and cowered under the table, whimpering. A few moments later, we were suddenly hit by a foul smell that just about knocked us over. The smell was putrid and definitely wasn't from a skunk. It kind of smelled like an overflowing outhouse in a garbage dump to me. It was ungodly. We kept playing and figured the dog had gotten into something. As we played, my sister, who was 4 years my senior, said, "Did y'all hear that?" Of course, we were laughing and playing and doing cheers and hadn't heard a thing. We figured it was Marta trying to scare us all, as it was getting dusk at this point. The lights had come on around the cabin. "No, stop trying to scare us," I said. "No, stop, be quiet," she said, and we all stood still. We heard a growl come from up the hill a little bit, and we all just took off running to our parents. "Mom, there's a bear over there. We heard it." Us younger kids were relaying to our mothers as we piled in on top of them at the picnic tables and lounge chairs. "Oh, they won't come this close to us. Just go on in and start a movie now that you've all eaten." That was the general tone from the adults. We did as we were told and took Rocky and went in and settled for the night. The adults stayed outside and ate and talked and drank into the late hours. My sister watched all us kids fall asleep in front of the VCR on the floor and sofa and recliner. The next morning, when the adults were able to, they got up and headed outdoors and brought us kids with them. "It's a beautiful day. Now go out and spend the day in nature." Around noon, my mom's boyfriend was at the back of the cabin and I heard him raising Cain. About 30 feet behind the cabin, there was a light pole that stood at the bottom of a large hill that sloped upward. He came from behind the cabin and said, "There must have been a bear through here last night, and it pulled the cord from the light." His friend Wayne spoke up and said, Well, yeah, it even pulled the trash off the porch, too, just inside the woods there. See it? Pointing about 50 feet towards the left of the cabin were the trash bags. They were laid, open, but intact. It hadn't been scattered, although it had been picked through, like someone or something had taken its time and gone through it piece by piece. "What is that smell?" my mother said. "I know I'm a city girl and all, but I know that is not a skunk." Mom sat down and looked towards the trash and said, "It must be the trash." Everyone agreed it had to be the trash. And then it was just gone, as quick as it came. Wayne said, "It must have been a bear. I heard it outside the house last night in the back. It was snooping, probably looking around for the trash. And it was left at that John and Wayne fixed the light, rewired it, and us kids were tasked at picking up any remnants of garbage, and the day moved on." We spent the afternoon playing and wading in the creek, climbing trees, and just being kids. That evening, the parents were playing rook on the porch. John announced that the kids needed to stay close to the house since we were sure we had an active bear around the property. We did stay close to the house, although out of view of the front of the house. Now, this was summer in North Carolina. It was hot and dry. There was mostly gravel around the cabin since grass hadn't been planted yet. We got out the flashlights and turned on the porch lights and decided to tell ghost stories. There we sat, and Eric started telling us about the Ripper in the woods. A made-up story, of course, but I sat there transfixed and terrified. My sister Marta was there again watching us kids, but sitting off to herself, I think maybe writing in her diary. A few minutes into Eric's story, Marta said, "Y'all stop that." "Stop what?" I said. "We're telling ghost stories." And Eric continued. "Stop it," I said, "or I'm going to tell Mama and you all will be done for the night." "What's wrong? What are we doing?" Eric said. "Throwing rocks at me," she said, and she picked up a piece of gravel and threw it back at us. At that point, we heard footsteps coming up from behind where she was sitting, and we took off running to the house. As we walked in, we heard a knock coming from behind the cabin. It sounded like it was off a tree. Then to our east, we heard another knock, knock. We were just petrified and told Mom and Pam what we heard, and they laughed at us. Wayne and John went to the store. I'll bet they knew you were telling ghost stories and were probably out there just trying to scare you. They continued laughing, yet still hurried us all inside. At 9 o'clock, we did a cookout again, and the folks played cards and drank a few beers, and soon it would be our bedtime. I noticed that Rocky had stayed inside or on the porch all day. I don't know why I noticed, but I did, even at that age. About 30 minutes later, I heard John's Jeep Renegade come up the side of the road, which was steep, and he had to give it some gas to get the rest of the way up to the dirt and gravel drive. But then he came to a dead stop. We could hear the motor idling. It seemed like it took forever, and then we heard the truck back down to the road again and make another attempt to pull into the drive. Mom and Pam were still on the porch, and at this point were standing while we children gathered on the porch too. We wanted to see what was going on. The Jeep pulled in and stopped and sat there. They just seemed to be sitting in the car, not talking, but just sitting. Then, after a few minutes, John and Wayne got out, and John spoke loudly. "In the house, everybody, now!" Wayne said, "Come on now, go!" Everybody was kind of curious, but we did as we were told. "What's going on?" Mom asked. "Honey, just go inside. I need to talk to Wayne a minute," John said. We kids were of course looking out the windows, wondering what was going on. The adults were whispering amongst each other. I went into the kitchen to have Mama braid my hair after my shower, and I could hear them talking. "It was no bear. I saw it with my own 2 eyes," John said in a whispered but urgent tone. "You have been drinking most of the day today, John," Mom said, gritting her teeth. I just acted like I was oblivious and kept my mouth shut. "I haven't, Mary," Wayne said to my mother. And I saw it too. It wasn't a bear. "Go on, your hair is done," Mom said, pushing me toward the living room. I went in and piled in with the rest of the kids, and Rocky, well, I lay next to him. Drowsy and nodding off, I heard my sister start another movie, something she wanted to see. I heard the adults still playing cards in the kitchen, and I heard Rocky start a low, angry growl. "Hush up, Rocky," I said. "You'll wake everybody up." I just laid there and tried to go back to sleep. I felt Rocky stand up, and his growl got louder. "Rocky, hush!" Rocky took off towards the kitchen door, raising Cain. About that time, we heard a growl that came from outside the kitchen window, right by where the adults were. It was a deep-throated growl. "Oh my goodness, what was that?" I heard my mom say. The men stood up, and John tried to grab Rocky as he bolted through the doggy door. At that point, we're all awake and had also heard the growl. We were all in a state of shock. John opened the kitchen door and yelled for Rocky, and we could hear him barking in the distance along with more growls. In a few minutes, it got quiet, and then we heard Rocky again, but this time he was yelping. He was hurt. Then another loud yelp followed by another loud roar to our south, and then nothing. Not even the frogs or the katydids. Nothing. We were worried and scared and crying, and the ladies were trying to comfort us, and the men, well, they didn't know what to do. It was pitch dark, and the light in the back of the house was off again. John flicked the switch. Nothing. Neither of the men wanted to check it out. "First light, we'll go out and find him. He's probably down at the creek playing." "Yeah, that's what we'll do," Wayne said. The four of us kids finally settled down and got back to sleep. The adults gathered back at the table, but no cards were being played. Pam was crying hysterically, and Wayne was trying to calm her. I slept on and off the rest of the night. At times I'd wake up and hear the adults. Somehow, I knew they were standing watch. I felt a comfort just knowing that. The next morning, Mom woke us up around 9:30. The guys were gone to look for Rocky, and we ate breakfast. We dressed and left for church in town since it was Sunday. Mom and Pam left at the same time, and I swear we caught air coming down that mountain that day. Later that evening around 5, John came to our house, and he looked awful. "Did you find Rocky, John?" I said, as he walked in. "Yeah, honey, I'm afraid I did," he said, looking over me to my mom. My mother distracted me and asked me if I wanted to ride bikes with my friends. John's comment went right over my head, and so I headed for the door and onto my bike without a care. In my little world, it was riding bikes and playing with friends. I'd mostly forget about the incident at the mountain. It would be a couple weeks before we went back to the cabin. 4 or 5 as I recall. That first weekend back, we had company. My uncle and his kids had come in from Tennessee to visit. My aunt had stayed back because of work, so my uncle grabbed the kids and came down to help John finish some work around the cabin. When we got there, we noticed some changes. John had planted grass and had cleared off another 100 feet in the front and maybe another 75 in the backyard. I don't know if he thought this would keep whatever this was from coming in any closer, but my uncle came in to help seed the rest of the yard and move and fix the light pole in the back so the bear would quit knocking down the line. To hear John tell it, he had to fix it 6 times since that weekend we were all there. We cooked out that evening, and my cousins and I played and ran through the woods and creek. We chased frogs and just had a great time. Around 9, we all headed in, took showers, and my uncle had requested that we sit down, write a note, or draw a picture for my aunt since she couldn't be here, and he would then drop them in the mail. My cousin Lissa, Francis, and Lance all sat down at the table to color our aunt a picture. My Uncle Jack was a big man, tall, about 6 feet 6 inches and shaped like an exclamation point, just straight up and down. I knew that he'd fought in the war in Vietnam and that he wasn't scared of anything. All of a sudden, just outside the window, we heard that growl again. It was low and deep, like it was coming from its gut. My uncle clearly heard it and asked, "Mary, did you hear that?" Everyone heard it. Mom frantically replied, "Yes, Jack, I did." "You kids come in the living room." We were crying at this point and scared, so we ran to her. And when the growl stopped, another noise began. A heavy slap hit the side of the cabin over and over. The kids and I stayed close to Mama. John came down the hall with what I now know was a shotgun, and my Uncle Jack always carried a sidearm. They talked privately off in the corner of the living room, and then suddenly we heard Marta scream the most ungodly scream. My mother jumped and ran, as did John and Jack. Marta was in her bed and pointing to the window. The window had been up, and there was that smell again. It seemed strong, an almost concentrated odor. And then we heard the grunts, and then a growl, and then a slap on the side of the cabin right above the window. Mom landed on the bed with Marta and us kids. We did too, as the men took aim for the window. I got a good look at it, and I could see that it was looking down from the window, which told me it had to be extremely tall, maybe 8 feet. Its fur seemed reddish, I thought, maybe more auburn. It had a hideous face that reminded me of a gorilla with wide nostrils. The eyes were black, and its teeth were a yellow, dingy mess. It looked at the time like a mouthful of canines, sharp and pointy. John went out the back door, and Uncle Jack went out the front, and we didn't move a muscle and stayed in that room with Marta. We could still hear growls. Some were close, others seemed more distant. I also recall hearing a whoop, whoop off in the distance. Not long after, the woods were silent again. After a while, we heard the men come inside, and we all ran to the kitchen. John stopped at the fridge and opened it. Uncle Jack stood there just staring, and John handed him a beer. They stood there in silence while gulping down that beer. "What happened?" my mother finally said, breaking the silence. The men didn't respond, and both went back out the front door. After a little while, we heard a gunshot, then nothing. My mother and father had raised us very religious up to their separation and divorce, and we began to pray. You know us Southern folk. We prayed till sunrise until John called Uncle Jack and Mom outside at daybreak. Naturally, we kids quietly followed behind Mom, our eyes wide with curiosity. John pointed to the window, and slightly above mine and Marta's window, it was evident that there were deep scratches in the siding, as if for some reason this thing, this Bigfoot, had scratched with its nails or claws for some reason. Maybe it happened during the earlier confrontation. Below the window where John had planted grass were footprints, huge footprints, showing the toes. John wore a big shoe, but these prints dwarfed his size 13s. "I didn't believe him, Mary, but I do now," my Uncle Jack said. "I peed my pants, Mary. I peed my pants," he said, pointing to them. "It's a Bigfoot, Mary. I thought I was crazy, but it is, and I'm pretty sure there's more than one." We all stood in silence, scared, not knowing what to do. Marta interrupted. "I'd heard you all talking about the weekend Pam and Wayne were here and about how Rocky died, how he was crushed. And I went to the library and I checked out some books," Marta said. "I think it was after me tonight, because of what happened to me today." I would find out later what she meant. I think maybe it knew. It kept smelling and sniffing at the window. It could smell me and was trying to get to me, she said in between sobs. It took Mom forever to get us calmed down, as she was just as scared and even more concerned for our safety. We all piled in the living room that night, with the men. At that point, my mom turned on her heels and said, "That's it, kids. Let's go. Lissa, Francis, Lance, you're all coming with me. Let's go." She wasted no time gathering our belongings and getting us out of there that morning. We left in our PJs, if that tells you anything. We would not be coming back to the cabin on Barrett Mountain. I've only told this story to my children and my husband, and the reason I told my husband was to explain why I would not be living outside of city limits ever. For my kids, it was to explain why we didn't venture out and go camping and such. I'm a city girl through and through. My idea of camping is room service now. Thanks, and God bless.